viewers, dear ladies and gentlemen, we are very happy to welcome Professor Jeremy Wolfe as our guest today. Professor Wolfe, could you tell more about the research that you are doing and the goal and the mission of your research laboratory?
Hi, good morning. So I run a lab that's called the Visual Attention Lab. It's part of Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. That's one of the Harvard teaching hospitals. Our particular interest is in visual attention and visual perception, more specifically, how people find what they're looking for, and how they sometimes miss what they're looking for, even though that something might be absolutely right in front of their eyes. So in a medical setting, that might be how does a radiologist find a tumor in a mammogram, in a breast x-ray, and why do they sometimes miss those, even though they're quite visible? If you're traveling around the world, that might be how does the officer at the airport look for guns, bombs, and knives in carry-on luggage? And if you're just around the house, it might be trying to figure out where the cat has gotten to, or where your socks are, or something of that sort. We're particularly interested at the moment in these cases where people miss targets, where they miss things that they're looking for. And because this happens to us all the time, it happens so often that we've taken to referring to this as normal blindness. So you know that if you're editing a paragraph of text, you can miss a typo in there, even though it's perfectly obvious when somebody else points it out to you. It was right there. And we all know from around the house that you can fail to find something that you're looking for. And when you actually do find it right there in plain view, you know you looked at that spot. And we're very interested in figuring out how it can be that that the information landed on your retina, even perhaps that you paid attention to it, but you somehow didn't process it in a manner that let you say, oh, there's the thing I was looking for. So that's the broad picture of what we're working on these days.
Sure. What is the goal of your research? What would you like to achieve? As I understand, you would like to achieve more precision from the human side, but what is the one big vision in the future?
Well, so we have both basic and applied goals, I would say. I mean, I've always, for my whole career, I've been interested broadly in the question of why does the world look the way that it looks? And I would love, before I retire, to have an answer that I was happy with. But that's a very broad, sweeping kind of goal. On a practical level, we're interested in more short-term goals, like how could we cut down on the number of errors that experts make in the search tasks that they do, that we really, really want them to do well. We really want that radiologist to find all of those tumors and not to call a woman back for too many extra exams for things that aren't cancer, for instance. We would really like the computer to work better with human experts. At the moment, as you probably know, looking at the news, deep learning algorithms are doing a marvelous job of getting to almost, or sometimes better than expert levels, doing things like looking for tumors, or helping your car to drive by itself, or so on. But in these cases, the human and the computer never quite seem to work together as well as we would like. And a goal of the lab is to figure out why that's the case and figure out what we can do to make a smart computer work better with a smart human. Those are the sorts of specific goals that we're working on these days.
Sure. It is very broad and very complex topic. It has a lot of models that one can work on. Talking more about the projects that you have and about the methods that you use, how could you categorize the projects that you have and the methods that you apply? As I understand, it goes also interdisciplinary. It is not pure biology, but it is also computation. How do you combine different fields here?
Well, we're actually we would not be classified either as a biology lab or as a computational lab, particularly. We are a behavioral science lab. Almost all of the data that we collect is non-invasive data from humans, sometimes expert populations, more often healthy young adults who volunteer to be in our experiments. We are putting up tasks on the computer, they are making responses, and we are analyzing those data. The sort of data that we would typically be analyzing are response times, how quickly can you get an answer out, and error rates, how often do you make a mistake. And from there, the computational side of things is that we build models to try to explain the human data, though we're primarily a data-driven lab. We work with other labs that, for instance, do imaging, or who start from a more computational point of view and come with a model and want to find data that either prove or disprove the model. And we also are in close contact with people who do work on the biology at a cellular level, often in other animals, from mice to monkeys, typically.
That's interesting. So essentially what you're saying, you have the human experiments, you have animal experiments, and you're very much data-driven. So the data collection, data processing is a big important part of the work here as well. Do you do also the clinical trials at the moment?
In the US, that turns out to be a complicated question. So the short answer would be no. We are not doing clinical trials in the sense that most people listening to this video would think of clinical trials. In the US National Institutes of Health have redefined what a clinical trial means to be almost anything that involves testing humans. And so you will, in fact, if you go to the big US database, clinicaltrials.gov, and look me up, you would find some entries under that are listed as clinical trials, but they're not clinical trials in the sense of, take a drug, see whether it makes things better.
Sure. Talking more about the methods that you use, how do you record those moments when the human eye skips some object that lays in front of the eyes? How do you record it? What methods do you use? I believe that those who view us at the moment, they can be interested in such methods, or they want to explore deeper. What is the latest technology that you use at the moment?
So we use a couple of different non-contact eye trackers that sit in front of your computer. If you sit down at the computer, it will pick up your eyes quite automatically. You can then calibrate the machine to the particular observer, and that will let you keep track of where the eyes are on the screen with quite good precision. Other people are doing eye tracking in the wild, out in the world, using eye trackers that are mobile and that are attached to, say, a pair of glasses, and will tell you where you're looking as you walk down the street. And there's lots of interesting possibilities with these for eye tracking in these more natural situations. But we mostly eye track, well, we entirely eye track on the computer. What's interesting, eye tracking has gotten much, much more simple over the years that I've been in the vision research business. So now it is perfectly practical for us to take a little eye tracker to a radiology meeting and ask a collection of radiologists to look at a few images while we track their eyes, and then you can do really quite an effective job of seeing, when they found it, this is the set of eye movements that got them to the target, and in the cases where they missed a target, we can say, in this case, the radiologist simply never looked in the right place, and so it's not surprising that they missed it. But in this case, they looked directly at it, and then their eyes moved away, but somehow they didn't register that this was the item that they were looking for. So eye tracking can be a very useful tool for these sorts of studies.
Sure, that's interesting. Different people react differently on those pieces of information that they see. How do you envision how the technology can point a human to the right spot to pick the information which was missing from the eyes? So we learned that there are eye trackers. How do you point the person at that moment, or how do you see how it can be done in the future if it is still not available? How to point the person to that place so the person pays attention to it.
So you're thinking about how might a computer or an artificial intelligence system help you find what you were looking for?
Right.
The interesting part of this problem is that the computer has really gotten quite good at finding the what you're looking for, and you can easily point the eyes any old place you want by just putting a little mark on the screen if you're doing something in the screen, or if you were doing some sort of augmented reality in the world, you could put a virtual mark on something as you were walking down the street. That's not difficult. The difficulty is that in many cases, what you're looking for is quite rare, and the computer is good but not perfect. So think about the following sort of situation. Let's stick with breast cancer screening since it's a topic that we work on. Suppose you had 1,000 women. In North America, there would be, in a screening setting, there would be about 3 or 4 cancers in a stack of images from 1,000 women. The computer would probably get all of them, would find all of them, or maybe 3 out of 4, but it would do a good job. 90% of the cancers it would find, and it would only make false marks on 10% of cases, let us say. So that's really very good. That's about as good as an expert radiologist. But now think about what the numbers would look like in our stack of 1,000 women. The computer finds those 3 cancers, let's say, but it also found something on 10% of the other cases. So that's 100 out of 1,000 cases. So if you ask where the computer was pointing you, 3 times it pointed you to something good. 100 times it pointed you to something that turned out to be, useless. If you give me information that's only good 3% of the time, I'm not going to be that interested. And that seems to be an important problem at the moment. And if you were looking for something interesting to solve, figuring out how to get the computer to point you to the useful items without convincing you that most of the time it was pointing you to garbage, that's a tricky problem.
Sure, because it creates overwork, right? The pathologist needs to look for this 100 women extra, and without this computer, such extra work wouldn't be required. For the
Well, or it convinces the expert radiologist that the computer is stupid or useless, because the radiologist is no idiot. She can find 3 or 4 of those cancers too. So the computer is telling her something she already knew. And then she can quickly decide probably that these other marks are worthless. So she thinks, oh, the computer is not telling me anything I didn't already know. Why do I need it? I will shut it off and save myself a little time. And that's a tricky problem.
Sure. With the current state of the technology, what problem in this area has the best computer-driven solution? So we've talked that with the pathologist and the example of the cancer, it is pretty difficult. Are there any examples where the computer performs way better than the human specific area?
Well, I mean, there are all sorts of tasks. I mean, this gets outside of my own expertise quite quickly. And so you shouldn't really take my opinions on this too seriously. But there are, of course, all sorts of tasks where the computer or the machine is doing a fine job of doing most of the work. I gather that if I fly over to Munich, the plane is being basically landed by the computer, with the pilot sitting there making sure nothing bad happens, for instance. But I'm not adequately expert to know what the best corners of the application of AI might be at the moment.
Sure. Talking about the future and the perspective and the outlook of your research, what our viewers should know the best about your lab? And the second part is, what message would you have to those who are students, patients, or investors, and they are seeking either to join your lab, they are seeking more information on their current state of the disease, or they are looking to invest? So these 2 questions: the outlook of your research and the message to the students, patients, or investors.
Well, students would do well. My lab ends up not training graduate students, because we're sitting in a medical department. So in the case of students, the answer is, once you get your PhD, send me an email and we'll talk about whether this is a great lab to do a postdoc in. In terms of patients with clinical interests, the real answer is you should be talking to clinicians who are actually clinicians, as opposed to basic researchers like my lab, though we can probably tell you interesting things about how those clinicians go about looking at the images that tell you whether or not there's a problem here. Investors, that's interesting. So we don't typically. Other people in my field have products that where an investor might see an interesting opportunity. Our funding is typically government grants, though with some consultations over the years with corporations who have an interest in how do you find what you're looking for. So you can imagine if you had if your job was to draw people's attention to your product on the supermarket shelf, the sorts of things that that our lab knows about might be of interest to you.
That's good to hear. That's very interesting. Good. And what would you summarize as a perspective of your research in a couple of sentences?
I suppose, go back to the top and say our purpose is to understand how you find what you're looking for and why you miss what is sometimes right in front of those eyes of yours.
Good.
And what can we do to make it better?
Good. Thank you so much, Professor Wolfe. It was a pleasure to have you as a guest today with us.
Okay, thanks very much.